It's the show where Hawaii's newsmakers come to talk and to take your questions live. From the nation's capital to Honolulu Hale, from the state legislature to the fifth floor, we bring the experts to you and ask them what you want to know. Spotlight Hawaii with Yunji Denise and Ryan Kalesuji on the digital platforms of the Honolulu Star-Advertiser.
This episode of Spotlight Hawaii is brought to you by Long's Drugs.
Well, good morning. Thanks for tuning in here on this Wednesday morning. I'm Ryan Kalesuji, joined by Yunji Denise, and this is Spotlight Hawaii on the digital platforms of the Honolulu Star-Advertiser. This morning, we're focusing in on something that was discussed a lot during the gubernatorial campaign and really was one of the cornerstones of Governor Josh Green's campaign and his agenda in his first year in office.
Yeah, this will be a big test for the governor, whether or not he can get the so-called green fee passed. That is a fee that they want to charge visitors coming to our islands to offset some of the environmental impacts that all of that traffic has on our state. Joining us now to talk about this and where the legislation stands and how it could perhaps benefit our state are two folks who work in the conservation space. Please welcome Jack Kittinger of Conservation International and Carissa Cabrera of Hawaii Green Fee. Thanks to both of you for being here this morning.
Thank you so much for having us.
Likewise, thanks.
Carissa, let's start with you. We know that there was some movement on the bills just this morning. You've been tracking them closely. There are versions in the House and the Senate. Just for folks who have not been tracking this closely, in its current iteration, what is this legislation shaping up to be?
Yeah, that's a great question. So many measures were put forward this session, but right now, SB 304 on the Senate side and the House Bill 1162 are leading measures, and both of them are very similar. So for those listening that might not understand all of the details, they include some key elements, which would be and charging visitors around $50 per individual per year to access state-owned areas. So that could be state parks that many of us have been to. But the kicker with both these bills is that the revenue generated from that $50 environmental license would be returned to help conserve natural and cultural resources across the state. So part of that would be, scaling up work that the Department of Land and Natural Resources is doing and all of the management plans that could be actionized and scaled, but also a grant program to help uplift community groups that we know and love that already are working on implementing solutions. So collectively, this license would offset visitor impacts, as you highlighted, but through many implementing partners.
And Jack, wanted to get your thoughts on the measures that are currently before the legislature. How realistic do you think something like this is able to pass through the body of both the House and the Senate and agreed upon? And what are some of the conversations that you're hearing about the mechanism in which this could ultimately become reality in Hawaii?
The dialogue around this solution has never been more vibrant or more, broad reaching in terms of all the stakeholders that are engaged. I've been at this for several years, and I think it's safe to say that this year more people have ever been engaged on it than ever before. So there are, as Carissa mentioned, a number of measures that were introduced. There's really two that are sort of the lead measures now that have the most momentum. I think 304 passed this morning out of Ways and Means on the Senate side. We're still waiting for a hearing on HB 1162. We expect that to happen as well. So I think both of these measures will go to crossover. So they both have a strong likelihood of passing thanks to the leadership of our legislature and, of course, to Governor Green, who's been campaigned on this and now has been thrown his support behind it as well.
Jack, let me stay with you for a moment. What's the potential revenue of this? We've heard different numbers tossed out there, but, ultimately, what are lawmakers saying this $50 could generate, and how would it actually be collected? Because that's been a sort of a pain point throughout when then Lieutenant Governor Green proposed this as something that could be collected at the airport. Then Governor Ige said that was impossible because, that's federally regulated and the state doesn't have that jurisdiction. So, how much money could this raise, and how would they actually collect it?
Great question. Let's start with how it gets collected. we can't collect it at the airport, at least not without some federal exemptions that are unlikely to happen, at least not in a timely way. There's federal legislation that prevents additional fees from being applied to airline tickets. We can, however, use the bills use this mechanism of the state's licensing capability. So if you or I were to go camping or get a hunting license or a fishing license, those are well-established ways in which the state can charge a fee for use of a specific area or engaging in a specific activity. So both bills use that licensing authority that the state has. Now, how it gets collected there's been various proposals for that, but most center on establishing an app-based system, which is really the normal way that other places collect similar fees all across the world. We've looked at 12 different systems in many different other locations, and they all make use of sort of technologies like this. And indeed, the state is already using similar technologies for places like Diamond Head for site-specific entry fees. As far as revenue that it would generate, there have been some estimates of that the DOTAX, the Department of Taxation, has developed. There was a report to the Hawaii State Legislature from the Tax Review Commission, which had some estimates for that. And at $50 a head, we're looking at revenue in the neighborhood of $300 to $400 million per year, which is a consequential amount of revenue. The deficit that we have right now for natural resource stewardship is around $360 million a year. So this would go a long way in helping remedy that deficit. But the actual number will depend both on the amount that the green fee will be, and that's up to the legislature, as well as what exemptions might be in the policy. So sometimes seniors, for example, get exempted, young children, et cetera. So we'd have to look at the total number of visitors and how that pencils out, essentially.
And Chris, I just want to get into a little more of the details here as we talk through just the logistics overall, mentioning how this money would be collected through this potential digital app. Would that be specific to those who only go to a specific location? Would it be wide-ranging to any visitor that comes in? How would the visitor then be identified? There just seems to be a lot of logistical matters that need to be implemented and set up in order for something like this to become a reality.
Yeah, and this is a question that we get a lot, right? Because this is a very bold program. It's an innovative program, and it hasn't been done before. And so, there are a lot of details that need to be fleshed out. And I do want to highlight that in the measures that we've spoken about, the Department of Land and Natural Resources would be tasked with standing up the program with those types of details. So some conversations that have happened, as well as formally happened through testimony and things like that, include, using this as a really amazing opportunity to educate visitors through a robust outreach program at popular sites. So envisioning a visitor visiting a very common popular site across the state of Hawaii and seeing that a visitor green fee or the environmental license would be required, and as well as, what it would be used to uplift in that area. So this is helping wildlife and things like that. So Jack highlighted a website and an app development, but this was really going to take a lot of creative minds to make sure that, we're inviting visitors into this program to give back. It's very clear that visitors do have a role to play in sustaining these resources. And so starting at popular sites and expanding from there as far as communicating the requirement would be a great starting point. But this is also going to require, marketing campaigns and working with airlines to make sure pre-arrival messaging communicates the requirement. And I have faith that all of these stakeholders will play an active role in making sure that this program is robust and effective in the long term.
Yeah, and let me stay with you for a second, Carissa. So let's say I'm a visitor and I want to go to Kailua Beach or Lanikai, and I don't download the app. Would DLNR or who would be in charge of enforcing it? Would there be a fine associated with visitors who are caught in these areas who then haven't paid the fee, or how would that part work?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I do want to highlight that because this is this would be for state-owned areas. So there is language that would help redistribute funds to local government, city and county, but the license would be required for state-owned areas. So that came up in testimony. Like if you're coming and you're not accessing a state-owned area, the requirement doesn't necessarily apply to you. But as far as, visiting a beach and say you don't have your digital app with you and things like that, amendments have been including a fine. And I think that there have been a lot of conversations working with the department and the legislature about, there would be a grace period and multiple years to implement this program to allow transition. And so this extreme level of enforcement, we really want it to be an inviting program that encourages visitors to give back. And so the funding allocated from the license could help stand up more jobs for doe care officers for enforcement and things like that. But really, we do want it to be to invite visitors to be part of it in a positive way.
I want to bring in a question here. Heidi asks a specific question. Are you looking to limiting visitors to sites like Ho'o Maluhia, Lanikai Pillboxes, or Cocoa Head Trail? I know you guys can't speak to the exact locations, but she brings up a good point here about limiting visitors overall. Do you see this as an opportunity as well to maybe gauge how many visitors are visiting any specific area and maybe putting some guardrails or restrictions on, what we see as those sites that maybe have too many people there that could damage in a ecosystem or could provide some long-term harmful effects to a site because of the amount of people? Or is this solely just for revenue? Jack, we'll start with you.
Yeah, in other geographies, the green fees that have been implemented in other places have not been used as a carrying capacity management system. But I think that's probably what Governor Green was talking about in part when he was on this show. I mean, once you establish the system, you can do all sorts of things in terms of helping guide visitors to sites, helping maybe potentially ring fence areas through geofencing and have premium pricing, surge pricing like Uber does, things like that. But first you have to get the system in place, right? And as far as the good question that the listener posed in terms of specific sites, those sorts of things, probably the green fee itself and the license it establishes wouldn't do much to establish specific site level carrying capacity management plans, but it could provide revenue to offset those impacts. And potentially once the app-based system or whatever the department puts in place in order to create a portal for visitors both to pay for the license, but also to hopefully get information on those sites, would also be able to be used in such a way to educate visitors and ameliorate some of those impacts.
Yeah, Carissa, let's stay with the impact discussion. We mentioned broadly what this money could potentially be used for, but what specifically would you hope to see those kinds of funds go toward? Jack mentioned a significant deficit with natural resources funding right now. So what would this specifically go to?
Yeah, that's a great question. And also echoing Jack's sentiments about management, the intention of this funding is to help offset those impacts. And so looking at Hanauma Bay, which has a pinch point as a site-specific fee, when prices get raised, we see overflow from visitors going to other sites. Specifically on Oahu, we see them going to Kapo'o or Sharks Cove. And so this funding would help be able to offset impacts at popular sites like that. So when I think about the intentions and the funding priorities, a lot of those are at least generally outlined in these measures. And so we know that our communities need, we need to restore our degraded reefs. We need to heal our watersheds from an ecosystem-based approach. We face so many threats to native wildlife, flora and fauna, to help uplift and recover those populations. But also, the implementation of so many of these priorities when it comes to conservation and natural and cultural resources, which are so intertwined here, implementing those solutions will take all hands on deck, which is why putting out a community program as part of the funding priorities is so key, so that we have groups in our backyards working on these solutions that might be specific to that local place. So having place-based conservation across the state as well. And I think that based on the priorities outlined in these measures, we'll be able to see funding go to so many different key pieces, as well as, creating job opportunities for folks in the next generation to enter the conservation world and the conservation field with a sustainable revenue and salary.
Could I add to that?
Yeah.
When we started this journey, we really started to think about our resource systems a little differently. I mean, these, our forests, our reefs, they're incredible reservoirs of biodiversity with immense cultural and social values. But they also are infrastructure that supports our communities. I mean, realistically, if you think about the water, for example, which, you guys have, I think you had Ernie Lau on this program, right? I mean, water is a really hot topic because of everything that's going on in Red Hill and otherwise. But that forest, that you look at up Mauka is not just a forest with these incredible species and these incredible ecosystems. It is also our water factory. And we have been underinvesting in that green part of our infrastructure for decades. Well, this program will help remedy that. It's not going to fix it entirely, but it will go a long way in helping support that, because essentially that underinvestment puts that infrastructure at peril. And if it starts to fail us, then that is going to be a huge impact for our communities and a huge impact for our tourism sector, which a lot of leaders in our tourism sector recognize. This is a long-term investment in the thing that brings visitors to Hawaii. So we're bullish about that, and we're very excited about the sort of impacts it can have at the community level and for our economy.
Jack, you mentioned at the top that during this session so far, there's seemingly a lot of momentum, that there is a lot of support, obviously, from members of the legislature as well as the administration as a whole. But I'm wondering what kind of pushback that you've heard thus far. What are some of the disagreements and those who maybe don't agree in additional fees for visitors that would add a more of a markup to visiting Hawaii? And how do you address those who maybe don't agree with any type of fee that's added on to the visitor experience here in Hawaii?
Yeah, and I understand those concerns. I mean, the tourism sector has had a heck of a ride over the last several years. I mean, when we started this initiative, we were at over 10 million visitors. We plummeted almost overnight due to COVID to almost zero, functionally zero. And now we're, surging back. So the tourism sector has really had a very difficult ride over the past several years. I think the discussion we're having now about this is fundamentally different than we were having even 3 or 4 years ago. I mean, I think 3 or 4 years ago, folks sort of thought about this idea as that, well, that might be nice to have, but it's almost impossible to do politically or legally or otherwise. Well, we've crossed all those bridges, and now we're essentially having a discussion about how might we use this funding? What's the right model for it? What's the right level of the fee? How can it be used at the sites? How can it be used across the state? And that's a great dialogue to be in, and we need all the voices at the table. Hawaii Tourism Authority's been in a great leadership position, and we're thankful for John DeFries and the team over there. They have this in their destination visitor management plans, their DMAPs, as one of the priorities for several of the islands. They've been supportive of this, and there's been different ways that this could be implemented, other than the licensure way, which we currently is at the heart of the 2 bills that are advancing. So. And naturally, you can expect that some folks might favor one model over the other. And that's the sort of things that I've heard in the community from folks in the tourism sector and even in the conservation sector. But we've got a couple models in both the House and the Senate that are advancing that would be really transformative. We all agree.
Carissa, Mufi Hanneman from Hawaii Lodging and Tourism Association was on our program. We asked him about the green fee proposals as they stood at the time. He said that the industry supports conservation efforts, but prefers a model where it's site-specific, something like what we've seen, Hanauma Bay, or reservation systems at Haleakala, Hapuna Beach on Hawaii Island. What do you think about that as an alternative, and why do you think that is not the preferred model?
Yeah, absolutely. And we agree. Those site-specific models have been so effective at raising critical funding for these sites that are trafficked heavily by visitors and residents. And so we see that perspective because they almost serve as models that this does work on a small scale level. And so we really view this statewide environmental license as an extension of those site-specific models to help make sure that all of the other places in Hawaii are also funded, because our understanding is that right now those tremendous successful site-specific green fees are contained to the site. And so we're seeing, projects being uplifted at Leahi and at Diamond Head, and we're seeing like areas like Haena generate critical funding to restore many different priorities. But for us, when you look down the road 5 or 10 years, we want to make sure that, like Jack highlighted, the entire watershed, the entire ecosystem is funded and restored. And that will come from generating funding that can be applied outside of those sites. So we really do view it as an extension. And Jack, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this as well.
Well, we are, and great credit to state parks that has really been pushing this model and has seen a lot of success. For every site like Diamond Head, like Leahi, that has an ability to fund itself and to create those site-specific fees, there's dozens of sites that don't have that and won't have it because they don't have a pinch point or they don't have the right infrastructure or whatnot. And the way I think about this, if we think about this beautiful picture of our archipelago, we can't just take care of a couple beautiful little pixels in that picture. We got to take care of the whole thing, right? And this proposal helps us take care of the whole thing, not just a couple little sites. So we need to build on the success of these little sites that have done so well in Haena and Leahi, Diamond Head, and a couple other spots, and we can expand those. But there's no reason why we shouldn't think about the big picture, and that's what this program will do.
So in an ideal world, Jack, we'll stay with you here. If this were to pass, what happens to those site-specific locations? Do they continue to charge? Because we know that some of those are county-based. This would be a statewide effort. So essentially, would some of these visitors be paying for this fee as well as an additional fee for some of these site-specific locations? Or would that all go away and this fee encompasses everything within the state?
No, right now the proposal would be an added fee. So, and let me explain why I think that's appropriate. So I have spent a lot of time working in Palau, which has one of the world's best green fee systems, what they call the Palau Pristine and Paradise Environmental Fee. And that's a $100 fee for folks that visit Palau. But when you go to Palau, one of the most iconic spots in Palau is the Rock Islands. And there is an additional $50 fee to visit the Rock Islands. Now that Rock Islands fee supports conservation and management of that specific area. So essentially it's just like Leahi, like Diamond Head, where the fee that's collected for Diamond Head goes into the maintenance and restoration and stewardship of Diamond Head. But of course, the Pristine Paradise Environmental Fee in Palau goes to the rest of Palau, sites that, all over the island archipelago that visitors use and enjoy. So it would be similar to that.
Carissa, Jack mentioned Palau as sort of a model of where this works. Of course, that is different because that's not a state within the United States. Are there any other states that have done this? Would we be the first? And is this even legal on that front to charge people access in that way?
Yeah, there was a review which can be found on our website, hawaiigreenfee.org, that reviewed all of the around 13 green fee programs, and those were national and subnational. And so one of the most effective and robust subnational examples would be Galapagos National Park. So that's under Ecuador. And once again, Galapagos National Park does have a pinch point when you arrive, which makes it a little bit simpler to employ. But here in the United States, this would be the first of its kind. So when it goes back to your question of, how can we legally do this? What's been so exciting about the session is that the Attorney General's office, the Department of Land and Natural Resources, the governor's office, and the legislature are working together during these hearings to ensure that this is on secure legal footing. And Jack highlighted that, this relies on licensing authority of the state, but something that makes it stand constitutionally and legally is to ensure that the funding raised by the license is used to directly offset visitor impacts. And so right now, some of the amendments that you're seeing come out on these bills is ensuring that nexus is really, really clear in the measures so that this is on secure legal foundation to be generating revenue for conservation of natural and cultural resources into the future.
And just to stay here, I don't know if we're getting too much in the weeds here, and if you know this answer, but what is the long-term plan for something like this? Is there language within these pieces of legislation that maintain just what you said, that the funding will always be going towards conservations. Because when you look at Hawaii's history in the past, the TAT has changed. There has been other types of fees that have been implemented among visitors and sometimes locals that were intended for one specific purpose. But over time, that has evolved and language has changed for it to become a funding mechanism for other things. I mean, what is being done to ensure that in the language as it stands now, that this is in perpetuity, that this does not change over time?
Yeah. I can jump in on that. That's all right, Carissa. I think that's been a concern from the outset for this. And what Carissa was talking about is the difference between a fee and a tax. So the TAT, the transient accommodation tax, is a tax, and a tax can be used for almost anything. It's a broad-based mechanism. A fee, however, has to be restricted for the purpose for which the fee is collected. And in that case, the model that's before the legislature now is not only on firm legal footing, because we use licensing for a range of different things already, and it's well established, but also the revenue collected has to be used for what the license is issued for. And in this case, it's offsetting visitor impacts to natural resources. So in a way, it has a lot more protections against it being used for other things than the TAT or any other tax mechanism would have.
We're just about out of time, but I want to get a final thought from each of you. And there's a lot of mixed reaction to this proposal in the comments. Plenty of people who support it, but then another, viewer writing in, adding on fee after fee simply will cause tourists to go elsewhere. And we do know that this is a large part of the economic engine here on our island. So just a final thought from both of you as to, why you think that this is a good idea for Hawaii. Carissa, we'll start with you.
Yeah. I think that when me and Jack come from the front lines of conservation, right? And so we see a need every day for additional resources going to our ecosystems and environment, right? But, this is also about not just offsetting visitor impact, but uplifting and protecting our economic engine for future generations. So if you look 10, 20 years down the road, our visitor industry could be threatened in a way where we don't have the opportunity to invest in it anymore. And so we view this program, if passed now, as a pathway to help not only protect, our environment, our ecosystem, our way of life, but also our economic engine. And so it might be an additional $50 per tourist starting if this gets passed. But in 10 years, that might look like restored reefs, sites where visitors can be managed and empowered to do the right thing when they're there. And also, uplift conservation work that will really give back to future generations for decades to come.
And Jack will give you the last word this morning.
Thanks. And thanks for having us on. I think the risk of us losing visitors from this is very, very small. I mean, we had folks who are quite willing to pay $150 for a COVID test just to spend some time in Hawaii during the pandemic, right? So in essence, we have a proving point there. Also, this is the same thing that people thought when we first implemented the TAT back in the 1980s and 90s, that it would scare off visitors. Well, our visitor numbers have only gone up. So I think that risk is very, very low. I think the amount is very low compared to the total trip cost. I don't think it's going to figure in the decision making, and indeed some economic analyses have suggested that that's the case. But what I do think is a real risk that all of us see in the conservation sector, in the community level, and in the tourism sector is that if we do not take care of these resources, then that's to our collective detriment. I mean, the tourism sector will cease to exist in the way that it does if our reefs and our forests and all the things that make Hawaii special cease to exist. And that's the real threat that we face. We have these twin crises that we are navigating, the climate crisis and the biodiversity crisis. And they are interlinked, and we have got to respond. We are now in the age of adaptation, and we've got to put real resources into stewarding these resources, or they will disappear. And so too with it will a lot of our cultural values and our economic security. So this is a great investment in our future. We're thankful for the leadership that the governor, that the legislature, the DLNR, and many other folks have provided to this, and we're real excited about the possibility of it passing this session.
Jack Kittinger of Conservation International and Carissa Cabrera of Hawaii Green Fee. Thank you both for being on this morning and really getting into the nitty-gritty of how this all could happen. We really appreciate your time.
Thank you so much for the time.
Thank you both.
Thank you. Aloha.
Well, interesting, Ryan, to hear from them. And this is the first real in-depth explainer we've had on this potential program. Still a lot of logistics to be worked out, but in its current iteration in those two bills, one in the House and one in the Senate, one actually that just passed out of committee this morning, it looks like this would be some kind of an app-based system that would allow visitors to visit state sites and have access to those sites through their phone. And it's still unclear, there's a lot of details to be worked out in terms of enforcement, whether keiki or, seniors are exempted in any kind of way and how this all comes to play. But bottom line, you heard both of them really say that this is an investment in the tourism industry and into, our life as a whole.
Yeah, and something that does have broad support by many members of the legislature as well as by the administration. Perhaps the devil is really in the details at this point of trying to figure out and navigate through some of those logistical concerns, as well as just the overall mechanics of how this will operate with, of course, the governing agency of DLNR also playing a crucial role in seeing how this will be implemented and rolled out over time. There's also the partnership that would have to exist with members of the tourism industry. You hear their comments about how a robust marketing plan and strategy would have to be unrolled to ensure that visitors coming understand the process and understand what this fee is going towards, and could potentially include material that is broadcasted to national and international audience, as well as maybe on flights coming into the islands. So there is a whole nother piece of that marketing aspect and informational part that will also play a critical role. We also heard more about how that would pan out with some of the established places already implemented some sort of fee, and how this would be in addition to that.
That's right. So if folks want to go to Diamond Head, they would still have to pay that impact fee or go snorkeling at Hanauma Bay and so on. We do expect to have more pushback from the tourism industry. They have said, sort of as a body speaking through HLTA and other organizations, that they really support site-specific impact fees. We have yet to see, them come to the table really supporting this. So we'll have to see what happens in the legislature. They have from now until May 5th to work all of it out. We're actually going to have the governor on here next week, and we will ask him about how he thinks this is moving forward, and if this is something that he is pleased with in its current form. On Friday, however, we will be heading to Washington and speaking with Congressman Ed Case.
Yeah, there's a lot happening, of course, in Washington, D.C., just with the international news, of course, what's happening nationally, and how some of the things are affecting Hawaii and the support from Washington, D.C. and the congressional delegation, including Red Hill and the response from the Navy on the cleanup. We're getting an update from Congressman Case, who has been very active in the communications with what's happening on Red Hill. We've had him on this program a number of times. Always great catching up with him to hear more about getting an update on what's happening in D.C. We look forward to that conversation. We hope you join us right back here on Friday for another episode of Spotlight Hawaii. We'll see you then. Aloha.
Aloha.
This episode of Spotlight Hawaii is brought to you by Long's Drugs.